Welcome to another episode of the PlaceOS podcast. This week, our guest is Cameron Douglas. We talk about his career at VideoPro, working essentially from the mailroom all the way to CEO. We talk about the audio-visual landscape today post-COVID, and we just talk about technology in general. Hey, Cameron. So we've already been chatting offline, so we can jump straight into this. Cameron Douglas, you're now the CEO of VideoPro. So my first question is, what's the major difference from being executive director to CEO? What's the biggest change you've experienced?
Yeah, well, hey, John, and hey, Sabrina. How are you both going in Sydney? So the biggest change for me happened 6 years ago, becoming a business owner. That was the big change. When you move from employee to, having your house on the line, as a small business owner would often say, there's quite a adjustment. And I didn't come from a family of business owners. It was very abnormal for me. I came from a family of government workers, so I was very much more in that sort of world. So that
Can I just pause on that for a second? So do you feel like it was a big jump for you to be a business owner because you haven't had that, direct experience in your family? And I asked that because I realized, maybe this is a compliment to my dad, which I should give him in person one day, that he was a small business owner, and I've just grown up thinking that's normal, right? You start a business because that's what my dad did.
Yeah. So business ownership was certainly not something that I ever really thought about, but I was very blessed to see a lot of leadership from my parents throughout my younger years and then growing up.
Yeah.
Dad was always the basketball coach or the president of the Apex Club or the president of the Lions Club or always standing in front of a crowd and speaking to a bunch of people. So, my brother became a very young principal in a school, and I sort of followed a relatively similar sort of leadership path. So I think that really helped. But also, I believe that ambitious people are always going to keep pushing in whatever their environment that they grew up in. Ambition has a tendency, once it's turned on, to be unrelenting and never really let go of you. And so you sort of have to keep fulfilling that. That becomes part of your life's journey. So I guess I was very lucky that I landed in a company that allowed me that path from a very young age. I'm a typical started at the bottom, did a lot of the different jobs kind of guy. So becoming a director was a big jump. Becoming a CEO was by contrast a much smaller jump, but it did enable some more hierarchy establishment in our organisation. I've got a hugely supportive board, which for any CEO is the most important thing. I think if you're at war with your board all the time, I just couldn't think of anything worse, in how to live your life like that. So hugely supportive board.
Or even having a board that don't quite understand the company or the technology, having to spend board meetings explaining how things work, or there's so many ways boards can be just considered a waste of time. So if you have one that is an advantage, you're already in a good place.
Absolutely. A supportive board, a curious board, an involved board. Two of our board are executive in the business as well. So, one of the guys has been here for 25 years. One of the guys has been here for 35 years. So there's a tremendous amount of depth in those guys. And we've got a very strong leadership team as well, and a lot of longevity. So, it's certainly not like, coming in fresh as a CEO and sort of having to then learn everything. I can imagine that would be a really complex and difficult thing to come up to speed. But when you've got sort of 15 years experience in the business and then you're surrounded by 20, 25, 35 years experience, it really has a big impact on you. So no, we're in a pretty good place, and it's a pretty exciting time.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds like it's fortunate to find a company where you can work your way up. You have that opportunity to, I guess the phrase would be entrepreneur, they give you the freedom, they recognize your leadership skills and allow you to progress in that way.
Absolutely, and I do think that that's something that small businesses and SMEs really allow,
Yeah,
and that's not to say that there's not huge benefits in large organisations as well. You know, I've got some very good relationships with some very senior people in the big four firms, and you know, the way that they approach mentoring and the way that they approach staff development is just phenomenal. You know, it's far more sophisticated than what an SME would ever be able to achieve.
yeah,
What an SME can offer is massive exposure, you
yeah,
know, to a lot of different things. You know, risk profiles that could range from very, very high to very, very low. Um, Rapid context changing, which is something I heard from the Fast CEO in a webinar he did recently, and I hadn't heard the term before. But when you look at leadership in SMEs and startups, high growth startups particularly, rapid contextual changing is what you need to do, because 1 minute you're doing this, the next minute you're doing that, and you need to be able to just change, which I thought was really, really eloquent.
which doesn't suit everybody.
Mm.
But for the people that it does suit, I guess it's a draw card for recruiting as well. In my experience, being a software company here in Sydney, I'm competing with everybody. All the big
Yeah.
players have an office here in Sydney, and then some local headquarters here with like Atlassian and Canva just down the road from our office now, and they're larger, so they can have that sort of safety net. They can have the structure. But we can offer that exposure. Like you work in a smaller team, you can if you start doing something, you become that department basically.
Yeah.
You'll come in and you'll see a need for a department that doesn't exist, and you've just by default become the head of that department. As an example, like
Right.
so, and that's like what we can offer. We can't necessarily offer the $200,000 starting wage that a software developer might get in San Francisco and at Google, but we can offer like something where you don't reach your ceiling as quickly, and you always have that progression to sort of even start your own products, build your own, have ideas that get presented immediately to the executives.
So,
So
so I think something really interesting there. I read, you know, there's an unnecessary amount of time being allocated to the Great Resignation, and I sort of fundamentally
yeah,
don't agree with it. I think it's become a media headline in the same way that working remotely is going to be here forever was the media headline when COVID started to unravel. And unfortunately, sometimes we dedicate a lot of oxygen to these topics because the media puts out a line, and perhaps they don't necessarily deserve that level of oxygen. Um, but I think that we've got to be careful that we don't. I heard a leader the other day say model coddle. I don't even know the word. I'm not sure of the word, but we
yeah,
don't want to wrap our staff in cotton wool, because when you wrap people in cotton wool, you inevitably stunt their growth. People grow through exposure to things, and that's why the term is called growing pains, not growing pleasure. And I think that that's something that larger organizations probably need to be more careful about. SMEs kind of can't wrap people in cotton wool because they don't have enough staff to provide that. But that's something that I think, to build more resilience, we need people to be exposed to more opportunities to solve problems and grow and become better.
yeah. And when things get hard or uncomfortable, you don't just quit. If you
Mm.
build that resilience at the employee level, then the company therefore should be resilient. So I know you have been teaching, and you were a student of an MBA program.
Mhm.
Have you found that? Obviously, I imagine the fact that you're teaching, you found the course itself, useful in your career in going from, essentially the mailroom to CEO of your company. Is it something you would recommend to people? As I ask this because a lot of people ask me, should I do an MBA or should I just get more work experience? What would your advice be to those questions?
Everything that you do comes down to what you're willing to put in and what you're willing to take out. So I am very supportive of MBA programs, and I do I don't know, for want of a better word, sell MBAs. Like I go along to the postgraduate information evenings and I talk to prospective students about why they would do an MBA, etc. And what I always tell people is that, you know, as a doctor, you're going to do 8 to 12 years worth of study to be able to fundamentally impact somebody's life, you know, muck around with somebody's body. As a manager, you get to go into that game with no training whatsoever, and you're dealing with somebody's mind and their lives. And so if you're going to have an impact on somebody's life, then I feel that you should, you know, honor that by putting the effort in to, you know, be the best manager, leader, colleague, whatever that you can be. I think that fundamentally the argument that would come back from the startup community around MBAs, which is where a lot of the resistance usually stems from, is that it lowers their risk appetite. And they say, oh, no, well, I've learned this now and I've learned that now. And I've spoken to people who have been in the startup landscape, done an MBA, and all of a sudden they've become more risk averse, which is not what you want in business.
Yeah.
And so my argument to that has always been, well, you're kind of risk averse because you're ignorant in that regard. Wouldn't it be better to know all of the risks and still walk into the fire? Because that's really what courage is. So on one hand, I believe that, yes, you should do what you can to make yourself better, to deal with people. But on the other hand, I also believe that, you know, understanding risks and still walking into the fire is really the definition of courage in itself.
Yeah, that's a surprising answer. Actually, I haven't heard that before, where people think you'll become more risk adverse by doing an MBA. What I've seen from friends that have completed an MBA is the emphasis on all the soft skills that a lot of people think might not be teachable. And if I was to advise anyone to do an MBA, I would probably be more likely to advise technical people, because they're also the ones that are less likely to do it, or less likely to value the MBA before understanding it or taking part of it.
You're so right. It was designed for engineers in Australia to go and get their soft skills sorted out. Interestingly, that's very Australian. And I know that you guys do a lot of business around the world. An American MBA is far more focused on, you know, the harder skills. Australian MBAs are heavily focused on soft skills.
Yeah, I have a mate, James, who would rope me into some of his classes without telling me. So I thought I was turning up for beers, and it turned out to be an active listening exercise that he had to bring people into, and those beers at the end 3 hours later. But it was an interesting way to sort of see the skills they're teaching in these programs.
Yeah. Look, people respond very differently to the study, right? There are definitely people that do an MBA because they feel that piece of paper is going to have a big impact on their job prospects. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think that if you've gotten the learnings out of it, then that's the best thing that can happen. That's what's going to give you better job prospects. You're going to interview better. You're going to speak better. You're going to be better.
Let's talk about technology. So I think we're nerding out a little bit about business and MBAs. But last time you were a very early guest on our podcast under the old branding. And we're talking about things back then, which I feel like are starting to take place at a larger scale today. And that's namely workplace technology, automated workplace experiences. I think, interestingly, for your company, what I'm seeing a big trend right now is the reemergence of audio-visual being a focus. I feel like there was a while there where it was an afterthought, and everything was about hot desking and meeting room scheduling. But as people rethink the workplace, returning to work, AV is such a big part of that, both remotely and the experience of the room and special spaces. And I know you and I worked on projects together with PwC as an example, where they were sort of leading the way with this experience center. So why spend money on hundreds of of meeting rooms, you could maybe spend that budget on one flagship room that's a wow factor that could land bigger deals for you. So what are you seeing in that regard? Are you seeing workplace being a hot market for you right now, or is it just what people are talking about, not necessarily following through with right now?
So I feel that AV has been a bit of a shining star through COVID. It has enabled people to connect when they haven't been able to go to the into the workplace. Whilst Teams and Zoom have sort of gotten most of the attention, I'm a great believer in the whole AV industry, and a lot of innovation has had to take place over many years to get to this sort of perfect spot whereby a pandemic can roll out and people can still keep functioning relatively seamlessly. That was amazing. That really was amazing. And even 5 years earlier, I think that it would have been a different experience.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, well, one of the biggest surprise for me was that Zoom became a household name. I'm like, I thought that was just something I knew about, with all my friends. I'm like, talking about Zoom, that's weird.
Well, Zoom were just geniuses, right? Like I remember when they started advertising in Sydney Airport, like 5 or 6 years ago, and talking in AV circles, like, what are these guys doing? This isn't a consumer product. This is a business product. And they were just well ahead of their time. And, Microsoft had it with Skype. I don't think I'll ever understand why they abandoned such a powerful brand name. I mean, Skype was the word, I'm on a Skype. And then it sort of got changed.
Well, I think that's marketing by committee, right? Like you had to please too many people, and they went through so many transitions of naming, like Skype for Business, then all this weird multiple platforms from acquisitions, multiple brand names, and then little pockets of innovation they didn't know what to do with. It's hard being a big company, I imagine. It's hard to navigate those problems. And I have an old friend of mine that worked at Xbox, and he had some stats about how many lawyers they employed versus how many marketing staff they employed, and the ratio just meant that they're always, to your point earlier about MBAs, maybe too many MBAs that are risk adverse to the marketing. I don't think
Microsoft weren't even as bad as Cisco. I mean, at a point there, Cisco had Jabber, WebEx, Spark. They had the SIP endpoints. There was just so much branding that was going on. And I think they made that decision. They made that realization, like, whoa, what are we going away from WebEx? This is the brand everybody knows. And so they kind of brought it all back to WebEx, which was smart. But it also shows how AV and collaboration is probably being treated in the organization secondary to other, more prominent products. But all of a sudden it was thrown to the front of the party. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, this is how people are connecting. This needs to be taken more seriously.
And you mentioned at the beginning, or just before there, Cam, that a lot of the, over the last 12 months has been a really big focus on business-to-business technology, but there's also that key consumer piece. So what's it like, having a business where you've got a business-to-business focus, but then also a consumer focus? Do you find the products are synonymous across both markets, or do you have to have really separate strategies for both those markets?
We have spent the last 41 years having separate strategies for both of those markets. And in the last, 6 to 12 months, we have really started to just throw them together. We would be the only AV company, certainly in Australia, that would do everything in the AV category. So everything from systems integration and workplace technology through to consumer electronics and home theatre, through to live streaming and production and pro AV and live sound. And what we've come to realize is that someone might put a big commercial screen into their house, and someone might get consumer TVs and put them up in their office or school. People, when COVID unfolded and video conferencing was starting to take off, it wasn't the only hero technology. Live streaming was unbelievable, and the amount of churches and house of worships that were delivering their sermons through live streaming boxes was unbelievable. I sort of push it all together now. And, obviously consumer electronics and the whole retail sector has performed pretty well as people have been spending more time at home. But now that people are getting back into the workplace, they're all back to having that employee experience conversation. They're all back to talking about space and space utilization and space management, particularly where there's remote working and their ratios have blown out, because the reality of the remote working story is that most people are doing a bit of it. So, 1 day at home or 2 days at home, it doesn't mean you can write off that whole person not being in the office. You have to actually now start to cater for this sort of dynamic population that's coming and going like a vacation destination, So,
and without necessarily the assumptions that the workplace is for collaboration and at home is for productivity. Sometimes it can be the complete opposite. And I think a lot of people just assume that everyone's going to do their meetings in person and their paperwork at home sort of thing. But we need to just be dynamic. And I find it interesting. You and I, Cameron, we sort of have a background understanding what activity-based working is. And I feel all of these new trends still fall under that umbrella of activity-based working, basically matching the space for multiple needs of an employee throughout their day or throughout their week, to be dynamic, just having a dynamic workplace. And every workplace is going to be completely different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't you, what you said before about, we're just going to do our meetings at work and then we're going to go home and do our paperwork. That's the quintessential stereotype about how things need to be now. And I've got this other idea, and it's not any much that I've heard other people speak about, because when you talk about workplace equality, it's usually to do with people, fundamentally with people. But with the way that I see a workplace is it's kind of like a school uniform in an Australian school. When someone comes into work, they are all the same. Similar to how a school uniform kind of it separates out where someone's coming from, where they come from their mansion, or if they come from their tiny apartment, it doesn't matter. They're all the same. They're all dressed the same. And when we come into a workplace now, I think that it allows for an equality, right? Because the video conferencing that happened through COVID really cracked me up. You might have some CEO there, or a senior executive sitting there in their palace, and they've got all their trophies behind them, and all their view of some amazing place.
Yeah.
And then you might have somebody else coming in and they're sharing internet and the laptop with their kids who's doing homeschooling, and there's just so many different experiences that people were having. Well, you can say what you like about how everyone just needs to accept that this is the new normal and that, and I think that's wonderful. But the reality is that it's really bloody hard to work if you also need to be homeschooling. And it's really hard to work if you need to share an office with 2 other people because you're working out of your lounge room and, your partner's working from the other side of the room. They're not conducive to it. And I think that it showed a certain sort of elitism or wealth in regards to where people were coming in from. And what a workplace does is it creates this place where people go to work. That's its name.
Yeah.
And it also
purpose built. Yeah, and there's some things I've appreciated about working from home, and the main example I always give is controlling my own environment. And if it's too bright, I close the blinds. If I'm not comfortable, I'll change spots. So the air conditioning levels, I can turn it off. Having access to all of the functions of my apartment, compared to going to a commercial building where you have no access to anything, you don't have any control. And this is something I'm trying to, we at PlaceOS are trying to solve with some of the landlords. How do you give discrete control to people that have now just been very used to controlling their own environment?
But John, didn't you miss having an argument with someone about the air conditioning, like not working properly?
Yeah.
These are the conversations you were missing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one technology can't solve. It's still going to be too cold for some, too hot for others.
That will be unsolvable by 2200. No one will get it.
I always tell the story of scoping some work with PwC Singapore, and they wanted us to have the temperature. This is a feature that got canned eventually. They wanted us to have the temperature listed on the floor plan, so you could choose to go to a cold zone or a hot zone, basically. But from a little bit of digging into that, we realized that it's usually men that like it to be cold and women that like it to be hot. So we're sort of like segregating men and women in the office. So that feature didn't get past the UX wireframe stage.
Yeah. That's funny.
So another interesting crossover, I think, between consumer and commercial audio visual has been some people's setups at home are far superior than the boardroom. And when you add little professional devices, let's say just using your laptop laptop camera, but you add like a Rode wireless microphone to your setup for home Zoom calls. I mean, that's better than like the microphone that's on your desk in the boardroom. That's meters away from you because it's a close mic. So, seeing just the employee go out and invest in their own technology to improve their own experience, that's been interesting, and people just doing things like what we're doing now, podcasting, becoming really sort of normalized. It's as popular today as it used to be having a blog on your website. So almost anyone in sales and marketing has some experience with podcasting now and are out there buying professional audio gear for their home setup.
Absolutely. We have sold a lot of the Rodecaster Pros and a lot of obviously Joe Rogan uses an SM7B Shure, so there's a lot of people using those. We sell a lot of the podcaster Rode microphones as well. And you're right. I mean, content creation has blown up. And for anybody who thinks that an influencer is taking their photo on an iPhone, they're wrong. They're taking their photo on a really nice mirrorless or DSLR camera, and then throwing it up on Instagram. And so they're entrepreneurs unto themselves. Influencers are businesses, and so they're buying business quality products, even though it would probably sit into the prosumer category because they're not shooting a movie or an advert or something. So that just is another place where things are just colliding colossally.
Yeah. And during the COVID, is it good for your business to have both consumer and commercial? Because when one is down, the other's up. Does it have a direct relationship?
Definitely. The biggest challenge for the whole AV integration industry is the project nature of it.
Yeah.
So, it can be feast or famine if you're delivering a several $1 million project and then you're not delivering a $7 million project. I think there's a reason that most AV integration businesses get to a certain size and then they struggle to get to the next size. Mm-hmm. So we're lucky, we're unique. We've got this other part of the business which is far more consistent and far less seasonal. And that sort of just helps everything sort of normalize throughout the course of a year, as opposed to being the sort of big heartbeat sort of model.
And that includes physical retail stores, right? How are they going?
Obviously online flew during COVID, but our retail stores, our bricks and mortar stores, are actually maybe in the last 2 or 3 months, particularly growing at a faster rate, localized than e-commerce, which is really interesting. And it kind of just shows that people just want to get out and they want to look at it and they want to pick it up and they want to see it. Yep. And it's like remote working is here forever. The office is dead. The great resignation, we're all doomed. Everyone's going to resign and we won't have any businesses left. And then, that third one is no one's ever going to shop in store again. Online's here forever. And those sort of, we're kind of living in this world of just extreme headline grabs now. And we have to sort of look through them because it's always going to sit somewhere in the middle. Balance is the key in life, and it's the answer to everything. And so, for us, we've definitely seen the stores blow up. And I know that a lot of other retailers have seen foot traffic just go through the roof as well.
Yeah, it's definitely having that balance. I've seen this on a small scale with my wife's business. She opened a store in Bondi Junction, Westfield. And the worst thing about that is that was where the outbreak started. In the second wave in Sydney started in Bondi Westfield, and it's still sort of getting back on its feet. But people like experience. People like going to a curated space in a way, because you can be overwhelmed by, if you just list every product on your website as a catalog, what do you purchase? But if you go to a store, it's curated, it's got experiences set up, it has professionals there that can help, and I don't think that's ever going away. And humans are incredibly social, so it's a social experience as well.
Absolutely. I might get this wrong because I might say it incorrectly. So, you've got your primary industries, then you've got your secondary industries, and then you've got your tertiary industries. Primary being like your commodities and what you're digging up out of the ground, secondary being the manufacturing, and then tertiary being the services that you're kind of putting together. Experiences pre-COVID was very much the next level of services. It was the way to extract maximum value on a particular product or commodity or whatever. And the easiest analogy is always coffee, where you're like, you grow the coffee and you harvest the bean and it's worth this much money. You put it into a shop as a coffee bag and it's worth this much money, and then you sell it as an actual coffee and it's like $4 a coffee. You see this massive value increase. Delivering the experience was what everyone was focused on. Customer experience, employee experience, student experience, the learning experience. And then when COVID came, we all kind of fell back down to delivering of the outcome. So instead of going out to a restaurant and having a lovely dinner, you were like, eat food. that was the thing that you did. And so that's we're back to experiences now, and I think that's a good thing. And because experiences genuinely make us happy. It's what creates community and society. It's what creates stories. Very few people say, I bought this thing as their story. They're like, I bought this thing and then I did this, or this happened when I was there. The story comes from the experience, not necessarily from the action. So
that's such a great analogy with the coffee scenario, and just thinking back to Zoom and WebEx calls. That's just the meeting. It's not the meeting experience. No matter how many fun backgrounds they add or whatever features they add to the virtual experience, it's not the same as, well, in my world and yours as well, in sales, having a sales meeting where you probably learn most of what the client's after in between the meeting room and the elevator, where you're having small talk, and the meeting itself was very formal and you just run through your slide deck. It just doesn't get anywhere. So removing the experience away from the meeting, it's not sustainable that way. And I think, people are going to really come back to this key experience of everything within the built environment, everything, including retail, including workplace.
100%. And I'm obviously in Queensland, and our we've experienced COVID a little bit differently to some of the other states, and we had a live music event on
You've been
Saturday
lucky is the easy way to say that.
Well, we've lived on edge a little bit, and but we certainly have not experienced Victoria or New South Wales. My heart goes out to Victoria. I feel like in New South Wales, at least there was still like hope, through most of it, and maybe less so in Victoria.
Yeah.
But that sort of experience of live entertainment is what I live for. Like, I love that. That's my whole idea of a good time. And when you start to take away those things, then what are you left with? You're just left with, your work and your family, and those are the two big boulders. But you just lose all of the color around those kind of major events in your life. So experience will make its comeback.
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, I think that's a good place to pause. To any Sabrina, any last questions before we wrap up?
No, I've just been taking it all in and listening attentively. It's been really interesting.
Any last words, Cameron?
No, just I think that the future is still very bright and very exciting, and I'm very optimistic about it. I think that there'll be a healing process that needs to take place, certainly for some of the states in Australia. But even talking to most of the people that I know in Sydney now, there's an excitement back in the air, and
Yeah.
people are going to have experiences again, and we're going to enjoy that. And I think that's going to be a great thing for us to all reconnect and get back to enjoying life again.
And I feel like for us, the collective us, it's nothing but opportunity. So that's what I'm excited about too, getting back to life, but also the opportunities for our business is more than it's ever been in the history of our business.
Absolutely. Great to spend some time with you guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, Cam.